Great. So yes, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here today. This is the first time that I give a talk about non-open science or open access or publishing, directly publishing issues. So um, it's a bit of a new sort of a attempt from me. So today I'll be giving a talk about the current survey that we've conducted on research communication in Japan. I'll be skipping this slide because there was already an introduction about myself. So before we lunge into the meatier aspect of the survey results, I do need to talk a bit about our organization, Springer Nature. So I think uh, maybe most of you may know our organization, but Springer Nature is a company that sort of merged in a few years ago between Springer and Macmillan. So Springer was founded in 1842, very famous for journals and books. Macmillan, obviously very famous for publishing Nature, and and that merger has formed Springer Nature in 2015. We currently have four divisions, business divisions: research, education, healthcare, and professional. I think many of you probably know our organization through our publishing imprints such as Springer Nature Portfolio, and BMC. Our mission is to open doors to discovery, and our vision is to accelerate solutions to the world urgent challenges and contribute to these sort of missions and visions through publications. Currently, we have about 10,000 staffs around the world. I'm not going to go through all of the regions, but in Japan, we have about 200 staffs. Um, and when you look at our organization and network and our sort of activity in numbers, last year we had about 3,000 journals, and we worked with about 90,000 editors from 75 countries and with 750,000 independent peer reviewers to work on 1.5 million submissions, journal submissions, which I think um, equates about 4,000 submissions a day or something like that. And then we published about 400,000 articles, so about one third or one fourth, somewhere in between. And in terms of books, we published over 13,000 books. Um, if you're interested about what we do in our publishing activity, please do check out this annual report that has come out rather recently. So before sort of going into our survey, I did want to talk a bit about what led to the survey. And last year we had actually started uh, um, a forum called Japan Research Advisory Forum. And here, uh, basically, we wanted to create a forum and to discuss about important developments in publishing and also to be advised on how publisher like Springer Nature would be able to support and contribute to the researcher and research community. Uh, and the unique part about, I think, about the JRAF advisory board members is that the advisory members are composed of specialists from different backgrounds and fields. So we have researchers, URAs, funders, um, and we also have people from the media, science communication background, and David Kornhauser is one of our members, and he is the one I believe that has mentioned about our survey to you. And so, thank you very much to David for mentioning about our survey, and thank you, Ian, for the invitation. So last year's topic and theme was around research communication, and we wanted to have a discussion to deepen understanding about the current state of research communication in Japan, with two focuses: one being across different disciplines in the context of supporting interdisciplinary research and things like that, and the other aspect was at the research to have a deeper understanding about the interface of research community and the media slash the general public. Our survey was done as a follow-up to a discussion at the forum And the objective of the survey was to deepen our understanding of researchers' habits, objectives, and motivations, and challenges to conduct research communication towards the wider community. About the survey slides, I do have to say this again. So these slides are purely a presentation of our survey results and doesn't really represent our opinion. And here we also have to define what we meant by research communication here is that um, basically it includes things like press releases, media interviews, social media, lectures, and more, open campuses. But we have decided to exclude research communication at scientific conferences. Here, what we meant by the wider community is that the audiences outside of your specialized field, including non-researchers, audience, and the general public. So it does also include other scientists as well. Um, the survey was offered in both languages, and about 97% the responses were in Japanese. And we had about 21 questions, but we're not gonna go through all the questions just because of the time. Um, so quickly on the demographics, so majority of the respondents were from university and the senior researchers. We were hoping to get a bit more responses from the earlier age group, but I guess our readers and people who have signed up to our sort of newsletters are perhaps in the more senior age group. So we have sort of broken down and categorized the aging group as under 44 as early career researchers. We had to do that to get enough numbers. And then between 45 and 54 is mid-career researchers, and 55 is senior researchers. So slightly, shifted above what we had initially wanted, but we thought this was the best way to move forward. In terms of the subject fields and where the researchers came from, majority of the respondents were university faculty members and some from research institutes and corporate sector. And most of our respondents were from the STEM field. So we had about a third from life science, a third from mathematics, physical, and applied sciences, which is quite broad, and about 20% from medical and clinical science, and slightly less than 10% from the humanities and the social sciences. So the first thing that we wanted to ask here was that we wanted to ask, is research communication important and interesting to you? And surprisingly, in a sense, about 90% of researchers agree that the research communication is important and express strong interest in communicating the research to the wider community. Now, um, we did have over 1,500 responses with 1,100 responses that was above 80%. So number of responses were quite high, I think. That said, we do also have to remember that there probably is an inherent baseline bias where people who may be interested in a topic of science and research communication is taking a survey. But from here, we found out that people thought communicating research was quite important and they're interested. And when we broke it down by age group or subject, we didn't really see a very big difference between these groups. When we asked them about what methods people have used, um, of who's communicated their research in the past 3 years, more than 50% said that they shared their research through press releases and or deliver lectures or demonstrations for the general public to communicate their research finding to the wider community. And a similar percentage of researchers indicated that they have undertaken the remaining option, such as open campuses or introduce research on their homepage or blog, or demonstrations at elementary school, uh, so on and so forth. So when we looked this data by age groups or the subject field, um, or how they communicated, we found out that press releases and lectures and demonstrations for the general public was the most common method across all age groups. We also found that the higher proportion of senior researchers shared their research findings via writing articles upon request. Um, and or delivering lectures. Perhaps if they're senior, maybe they are getting more invitations and requests and whatnot due to their longer career. We also found out that ECRs, early career researchers, were more likely to use social media to communicate. Um, so while press releases were quite common way to communicate, we did find that compared to researchers in life science or medical or applied sciences, researchers in HSS use press releases less. And on the other side, on the other hand, we have seen that HSS researchers communicated their research to the wider community via lectures and demonstrations to the general public the most. In terms of the objectives, I'm really sorry for this texty slide. Um, the main research communication objectives selected by the majorities were to share the research finding that the researcher um, themselves think will be of interest to the society. And the second reason was, or not the second, but at a similar percentage, they also responded that the objective was to promote their own research. 41%, so the next highest percentage said that the objective was share research findings that are interesting to me. Um, and 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 there were a bunch of other reasons that people have communicated coming at similar percentage, whether it was around being assessed by research institutes as an achievement or finding collaborators outside of their field, so on and so forth. Um, and when we looked at the others, they did talk a bit about benefits of this for students and society. So we do think the impacts of societies do play a role in why they're communicating. When we look at the objectives by the subject groups, we didn't really see um, differences between different subject groups. When we did see the results based on which communication, which language that they use to communicate research communication, we found out that people who have used both English and Japanese showed a higher response across the board. So they ticked more boxes in general than those that only communicated in Japanese. So perhaps the researchers who communicate in both language is inherently a bit more enthusiastic, or they're more interested to reach out. And in a sense, that kind of makes sense. And we saw this similar trend for other questions as well, that researchers who communicated in both languages seem to be, in general, more interested towards communicating their research. So this is a breakdown by the age, and I think I mentioned that we didn't really see a huge sort of difference. So we do see some differences, but other than the two arrows, these are not statistically significant. And the only statistically difference we saw between the age groups were that um, less senior researchers so basically building personal profile and career progression was less of a reason for a senior researcher to communicate research, which kind of makes sense. And more of the researchers in that age group were communicating to be assessed by funders as an achievement. When we asked them about their target audience, about 60% had a clear idea of who they wanted to reach out to. The majority of the respondents aim to reach to the general public and or other researchers within their field or also outside as their main target. And when you look at the different disciplines as well, there really isn't a big difference, whether it's different age groups or subject. People in general are interested to reach out to the general public and researchers and students. When you do look at the science communicators, broadcast media, and journalists, they come in at 20%, 15%, and 13%. So it was not one of the higher priority for our basically respondent groups. And only 12% included funders as their target audience, um, which may be implying something around what people are thinking about, what is being counted towards research achievement and whatnot. Um, when we look a bit more detail about this data based on the subject field, what we find out is that a higher proportion of HSS researchers are targeting policymakers a lot more often than other researcher groups, and a higher proportion of medical and clinical science researchers are targeting healthcare professionals as their target audience, which makes perfect sense. Um, Corporate researchers are targeting researchers in corporate sectors, which also kind of makes sense. So here I'm just showing some of the representative responses from the deeper analysis. But yeah, I mean, in the end, I at one point I will be, because I will be putting this on the Figshare, you will be able to see all the different type of data, and that may interest you, hopefully. When we asked him about what language was used for the research communication, about 50% use both languages, both Japanese and English. About 50% use only Japanese, and only English was about 4%. It was quite surprising, me personally, to see the split between both language and Japanese was 50-50. Um, Especially, against this backdrop of a lot of the university trying to increase international brand and profile and visibility. But this is what we saw. And when we looked at this data by the methods of research communication, so for those who replied press releases, about 57%, so about 60% use both language and 40% use just Japanese. And when we looked at lectures and demonstration for the general public, it was again about a 50-50 split. Um, I guess, again, it makes sense that the slightly higher proportion of researchers um, you know, use both languages to do press releases I think for the when you consider about which audience that they're trying to reach out to. When we asked the target regions, over 70% of participants who had recently shared their research specified Japan as one of their target regions for communicating their work. Uh, Only 13% had their sole target audience as Japan. And the researcher who responded global audience, so this includes Japan as well, is 38%. Um, Researchers that communicated in both languages only replied 8% to Japan only, and researchers, and this was quite surprising, and which also makes sense. But researchers that only communicated in Japanese responded less than 5% for outside of Japan, which again makes sense. But yeah, so they're very much mostly interested to communicate towards the community in Japan. Um, yes. When we asked the researchers what have prevented you from communicating your research, the most common reply was that no opportunity to communicate to the wider community yet. About a quarter responded a lack of knowledge in how to communicate my research to the wider community. Um, we did imagine that we will see more of lack of time or lack of funding, but it didn't come as highly as I had initially anticipated. Some of the other reasons included COVID-19 restrictions, which perfectly makes sense from the perspective of giving lectures and demos. I think a lot of the researchers, perhaps from the corporate sectors, were mentioning about the confidentiality, and some seemed to be interested to communicate their research, but they felt like their research was not at the point where it can be communicated just yet. We then tried to ask a bit about researchers' motivation. Um, so one of the first thing that we asked was that should research communication be considered as a part of research achievement? And the 60% agree with the statement that it should be considered as a part of the research achievement. Um, and when you look at this response by age groups or subject field, it was very similar split. So regardless of different age groups or subject fields, about two-thirds, of the researchers felt that the research communication should be considered as research achievement. when we did ask about the incentives offered by research and institutes and funders, uh, overall, a higher percentage of researchers reported being offered incentives to communicate their research by the research institutes and funders. That said, most of the participants reported that they did not receive nor were aware about any incentives. So if, the research institute are actually offering incentives, this should perhaps be communicated a bit more clear, maybe, or I do think it's both ways, but that is probably something that this data is telling. And if the organization is not uh, considering as a part of the research sort of a is not offering any incentives, maybe this can be a point of discussion. When we ask researchers what would motivate researchers to communicate more, um, the top reason was to be considered as part of a research achievement by the research institutes, followed by interest shown by the general public. Um, and I don't think these responses are too surprising. And this was followed by considered as a part of a research by the funders and interest shown by the students. When we look at these responses by the different age group, what we see is that overall, early career researchers are, wanting to see more across the board, I guess, meaning that any of these would motivate them more of the selections. And what we saw a clear difference between the age group was that more ECRs were would be motivated to communicate more if it was considered positively during the hiring process or if there was some direct payment involved, um, and if it counted towards awards and recognition, and if it was considered as a part of the research achievement by the funders. And you'll see especially a big difference, with the hiring process in direct payment and award and recognition between the different age groups. Yeah. So when we ask our researchers, do you need support to communicate your research effectively? Almost 80% agree to this statement, indicating a need for greater support in conducting effective research. And when we looked at this by the age group, while all age groups do responded that they would like to have support, a higher proportion of ECRs agreed with this statement. We then asked the researchers what are their challenges to communicate. Um, and I'm sure there are other challenges that we could have thought about, but these were what we came up at the time. And 66%, the most common responses was around communicating in plain language for non-experts. Oops. Yeah. Wait. Um, sorry. Yeah. Language. And then more than half responded the report in having difficulties in finding the appropriate medium to communicate their research, and about 40% responded that it's difficult and challenging to create appealing visuals or the narratives for their research story, especially when they want to appeal towards the wider community. And the other challenges that the researcher responded to was coordination between different stakeholders and their interest groups. So especially if you have co-authors or if the researchers are working with the press offices and again different URAs, and so I guess they can have different interests. Um, they did mention about, and I guess this is part of lack of time, but needing help with public relations, which if they do this, it only adds to their workload. So people were saying that this can be a challenge. Some of the people did mention about finding the right audience and reaching the right audience, and some other responded about the confidentiality concerns. When we asked the researchers about what support are offered at their institute, um, half of the authors stated that they received support from the communication or public relations team. About 10 to 20% of the authors are are aware about the supports provided by the research institute, um, writing research summaries in plain language or improving oral communications and presentation skills, engaging with the media, and so on and so forth. But as you can see, overall, the percentage is quite low. And what we saw a lot was is that a lot of the researchers were um, stated that they either received minimal or no support at all. Um, and obviously, there is a high possibility that it could be that they were simply unaware of the support that were available to them. So we finally ask about what support has been helpful and what support would have been helpful. When researchers were asked about this, it was the support from comms and PR team that they found to be most useful, followed by oral communication and presentation skills training. When researchers were asked about what would be most effective resources and support, more than 70% of them indicated that any kind of support, which is sort of limited to the multiple choice that we have up there, but would be helpful for the research communication efforts. So any of the choices we have. Um, and again, considering the responses, I think many researchers may not be receiving support training, nor they are aware about the resources that are being provided. So I know I'm coming to the towards the end of my sort of the talk, so it's probably good that I'm wrapping up. So the summary of I think my slides or of our finding is that in general the researchers are quite um, positive, I think, about communicating the research. So there was a high percentage of researchers find it important to communicate research, and they showed interest as well. The main interest and objectives to communicate research was to basically, you know, the engaging with the society. So the societal aspect played a big role, as well as what research they wanted to promote and what they thought it was interesting. This was also a important aspect of, you know, the reasons that they communicated. The target audiences were general public, researchers and students. Um, we spoke a bit about additional source of motives. So it seems like the research assessment and added towards achievement plays a big role, as well as if their communication efforts are, rewarded by the interest shown from the general public and students. And we just, I think, went through a slide about, challenges of communicating research where in general people were either were not receiving or nor they were aware about the training that is being offered. And from here, we can kind of say that some of these findings suggest that researchers could be more inclined to share their research if they were given support or if they know about it and acknowledged as an achievement. So this is the end of my talk. So for me, the next steps is that it, one of the things that I wanted to ask this group was that, first of all, is this data interesting to you, interesting for you? Is it useful? Um, we do intend to put this on Figshare, but what do you think would be the best way to share this information? What suggestions can we make from this and how? And do you have any suggestions for where we can take a deeper dive? Thank you for your time.